Ed Viesturs, he's one of the world's most acclaimed mountain climbers. He climbs high-altitude mountains. He's climbed Mount Everest not once, but 7 times. After all his years, all of his experience, you know what he considers his greatest lesson? It's this: getting to the summit is optional, but getting down is mandatory. How true. Mountaintop moments are amazing, sometimes even life-altering. But we can't live on a mountaintop. Coming down is mandatory. And that's one of the lessons that we can learn from today's gospel, the transfiguration of the Lord. No doubt, Peter, James, and John reached the summit. They climbed the mountain and they encountered the divine. Jesus was transfigured right in front of their eyes. He shone like the sun. His clothes became dazzling white. And it wasn't just Jesus. Moses and Elijah were there with him. And the voice of God spoke from a cloud. Who wouldn't want to stay on the mountain? I'd be like Peter. It's good that we're here. Let's build tents and worship and stay up here in this holy place where it's safe. Being on the summit was exhilarating, but staying on the mountaintop wasn't the plan. And if we'd heard the next verse of Luke's gospel, here's what we would have read. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met them. Yes, being on top of the mountain was awesome, but coming down was necessary. Hopefully, we all have our encounters with the divine. Hopefully, we all encounter the divine right here today at the altar in the Eucharist. The church calls it the source and summit of our faith. Or maybe we'll encounter it this week in adoration at some point. Or maybe in the quiet contemplation that takes place in our own home. They're beautiful mountaintop moments. But those mountaintop moments cannot be the whole of our Christian lives. Coming down from the mountain is mandatory. And there's important work to do off the mountain. We're called down here. We're called to come down from the mountain to encounter each other, to come down and walk with each other, to come down and live among each other, to come down and love each other. And that leads us to the question, how are we doing at encountering each other? How are we doing at journeying with each other? 2 weeks ago, I suggested that intentionally changing the way we think about and speak to people could be transformative. Positive speech, positive thoughts change us. And that's one component of how we encounter each other. But today, let's consider the other side of encounter. Rather than focusing on speech, let's focus on this. How well do we listen? How well do we listen? Just like positive speaking can change our brains, researchers at the Korn Ferry Institute. Korn Ferry is an institute, it's a think tank that provides international consulting for large corporate business leaders. And they performed an extensive study of executives. And the Institute determined that empathic listening activates a set of brain regions involved in feelings of warmth, reward, and affiliation. Highly compassionate listeners are more capable of quieting the parts of their brain that focus on themselves so that they can take helpful action. So just like positive thinking can change the way our brain works, Positive listening can do the same. But today, listening has largely become a lost art. We've become a society of poles: conservative, liberal, traditional, progressive, us, them. If we're listening to the famous talking heads, we hear things like, "You're either with us or against us." Or that common thing that's popping up all over social media right now: "If you don't agree with me, please unfriend me now." And church isn't always a lot different. We've all seen the bumper stickers. You can't be Christian and blank. You can't be a good Catholic and believe blank. All these false black and white relationship deal breakers we've created, all the while claiming to be Jesus followers. We can do better. And the church has a plan to do better. It's called synodality. And this weekend, our parish mission sets us on the journey towards synodality. Well, what is it? It's a word we've heard, but most don't have a real good idea of exactly what synodality is. If there's an American expert on the topic of synodality, it's Cardinal Robert McElroy, the Archbishop of the Diocese of Washington, D.C. And here's how he puts it: the synodal call is a rejection of divisions. It's a call to replace our ideologies and partisan lenses with the unifying love of the God of mercy who makes us one. It's a call to purify our communities of polarization, this unwillingness to see in those who disagree with us our sisters and brothers, called to walk in harmony along the path that God is preparing for us. That's what synodality is about. It's not us and them. It's just us. It's not an easy task, but it is our calling. Not surprisingly, our synodal journey begins with listening. Authentic, empathic listening to each other. Listening without agendas. Listening with an open mind, an open heart. Open to each other. Open to God. Open to being transformed. And for 3 evenings this week, tonight at 5, tomorrow at 6:30, and Tuesday at 6:30, we're going to learn about and practice having these kinds of conversations. Conversations with each other that are real. Conversations with the people we worship with every weekend. And it's going to be awesome. And what's the outcome of synodality? Pope Francis explains it this way: the product of synodality is that we plant dreams, allow hope to flourish, inspire trust, bind up wounds, weave together relationships, learn from one another, warm hearts. Those, to me, are outcomes that are well worth the effort. You know, I always like good stories, a good story that gives life to a message, and I struggled all this week to find just the perfect story to illustrate the power that lies in empathic listening and meaningful conversations. But in the end, I realize we all have our stories. We all have had encounters with people we knew really hurt us and how impactful it was on us. We've all had our encounters with people who we've listened to, and it's changed our perceptions of them. We all have a story about, after hearing someone else's story, how our minds had changed and how much we would have lost if we would simply have written them off because of a few differences of opinion. We know the transformational power of listening. And there is great hope. There is great hope for unity down here off the mountain. And there is a way across what divides us. And it begins with listening. So after we encounter Jesus here today at the summit on the mountaintop, we have a decision to make. How will we encounter each other when we come down from the mountain?